Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Kolpack and Izzo Podcast, brought to you by Gate City Bank, along with Jeff Kolpack, Dom Izzo with you, a maybe special emergency edition of the pod. We're going to have double the feature this week. Yeah, as
not emergency.
It might be for some Bison fans with the news on Monday that North Dakota State, former North Dakota State linebacker, can I say that? Might be putting the cart before the horse, maybe a little.
You're going to win a game next year?
Jabril Cox has put his name into the transfer portal. And I just tweeted this article out. You may have already seen it, Kolpack, from The Athletic. Meet North Dakota State's Jabril Cox, the transfer portal's new most wanted man, which I don't think that's too far off on the headline. Jabril tweeted out late on Monday that he wants to pursue the highest level possible. It's always been a dream of his. He thanked the North Dakota State coaching staff for the opportunity to play. Thank the Bison fans, NDSU administration. I know that I put my heart and soul into the success of this football program as well as my education. I learned to not only be a great football player, but also a great man. So with that on late Monday, pretty much became cemented there from the young man that all intents and purposes, Kolpack, it looks like Jabril has played his last down in Fargo.
What's that say about the Division I transfer portal that an FCS linebacker is the most wanted man in all of college football? I find that the most interesting nugget of this whole week almost when you just told me I hadn't seen that today yet. That an FCS guy is number one. It goes to show you that by and large, a lot of these FBS transfers who come back to the FCS, Illinois State's got this transfer. JMU's got this transfer. Indiana State's getting these guys transfers, FBS. By and large, most of them really don't add up to really a lot.
No.
I mean, there's some good
JMU
ones.
had a couple. The Polk kid was pretty good. He was a grad transfer from Penn State, and he was a good player for them this past season.
But a grad transfer is a little different than from a transfer after 2 years who's looking to move down a level to try to maybe get better. This is going the other way.
Yeah. And we can go a whole lot of different directions here on this. Let's first start with the timing of this and what this means going forward. Let's start first for Jabril. So the timing of this, Kolpack, is interesting to me because here we are. It's the full week of March, okay? Spring ball is started for some schools or will imminently. North Dakota State starts next Friday, a week from now that they get started. If he wanted to do this...
The 25th.
Oh, is it later?
Nope,
I thought it was
25th.
earlier.
Yep.
Okay. If he was going to do this, why now? Why not right after the championship game? I know we're speculating now because we don't have any...
Seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Somebody got in his ear?
Yes.
It seems rather obvious with that some school out there found a way to contact him, got his number, and said, here's a better way of life, like Gate City Bank. Here's a better way of life, Jabril. Come and think about this offer because you know why? Because you're going to make more money in the end.
Now, we have speculated, and people have asked us since, Kolpack, after his sophomore year, if he was going to leave early, if he was going to declare and go to the NFL draft. And Beth Hool from Valley News Live, I'll give her credit on this, she asked Jabril after the national championship game if he was going to indeed come back for his senior season. And he told her, yes, I plan on coming back. So obviously, now granted, that could also be in the heat of the moment. You know that. And I try to stay away from those kind of questions, emotional ones then, because guys it's the heat of the moment kind of deal. But obviously something changed. And right to your point, if these burner phones or whoever got to Jabril, likely an agent, maybe to his family, to say if you think he can play at the next level, maybe North Dakota State is not the best option to get highly drafted. Because this is all about the NFL now, Kolpack.
It's NDSU's worst nightmare coming to situations like this. And we talked to Matt Entz about this over the course of the playoffs that addressed about the early question, whether they leave early.
Yep.
I might address that in a press conference. I can't remember. Are you concerned that Jabril will leave early? And I think he said, absolutely not. He'll be back. What else is he going to say?
Right.
Again, there's so many questions in these deals that you just file under obvious questions and obvious answers.
Yes, right.
It's almost a moot point. Very, very rarely is somebody to come out and just give you the biggest blockbuster story ever. But you have to ask the question.
Have to ask it. Okay, so that's on the timing front of it. Now, on the where does he go angle of it, that's the really appealing part.
Who is
to
he
me.
followed, though, on Twitter?
Well, here's the
Ed
right.
Orgeron.
Yeah, so
and Bo Pelini.
And
he hasn't really followed a whole lot of people.
There's a couple other more on this
Okay.
on this athletic article. So he's followed back Jeremy Pruitt, the head coach at Tennessee, and Alabama defensive coordinator Pete Golding. Those are the two other ones on top of the ones you just mentioned. So those are all SEC schools: LSU, Tennessee, and Alabama. It ain't getting much higher than that, Kolpack. LSU's the reigning champs. Alabama won 4 of 5, and Pruitt coached with Saban before he got the Tennessee job.
I'm pretty certain about this, that the NDSU coaches, it caught him blindsided.
That was my next question.
Yes. They don't know who contacted them. They're pretty certain somebody did, obviously.
Right.
But I don't think they know who really contacted him.
We'll get to that in a second. Are you at all intrigued on where he's going to go?
Well, yeah, who isn't?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm really interested on this. Now, here's a couple other schools out there, obviously. Kansas State is one, and we should talk about that. Minnesota, Missouri, McFeely put that in his column of speculating on sites because obviously that's his hometown. And then LSU for the obvious connection that Bo Pelini is the defensive coordinator now at LSU and raved about him, Kolpack, every time that the Penguins and the Bison played. If I were to put a pecking order right now, I'd say LSU, Missouri, K-State. That's how I would go
That's
now.
The
1,
Izzo,
2, 3.
the
That's
Izzo rankings.
unofficial rankings right now if he were to pick. How about you?
I think LSU is probably front and center number one just because of those connections.
Right.
And the photo's been in our paper and online several times now in the last 3 days of Bo Pelini reaching out to Jabril after the game this
Might be
year.
circulating maybe down in Baton Rouge as well.
Yeah, Sampson better be on the lookout for his photo
Somebody
nationwide.
clipping that? Okay, what about Kansas State? And how would that...
Well, how do they approach it? Now they'll have to go, Kleiman will give his buddy Matt a call,
Right.
say, hey, look, we didn't do it, we didn't start it, but now the situation has reached this. By the way, we've had a couple linebackers arrested.
Right, correct.
We're in need of one. If it sounds like he's going, we got to be in the stakes.
How much does that change the dynamic of that relationship, by the way, if it ends up
Would
coming to
it be
pass?
different?
If the shoe was on the other foot, you're saying?
Okay, let's back up here a little bit. If Bison fans, and there's some out there that are pretty angry about this and feel jilted, but were you okay with Andre Martin coming from Northern Iowa to NDSU in 2010, 12?
Yep.
And helping the Bison to a national title? They needed a corner.
And he started that
very
year.
bad.
Yep.
They needed a corner very badly.
Yep.
Were you okay with him coming from North? Granted, it's different level, but were you okay with that process philosophically? Because he was a grad transfer that left Northern Iowa, which Northern Iowa was pretty good, and they needed him, coming here to NDSU. If you're okay with that, I think you need to be okay going the other way, too.
Hell,
you can't have it both ways.
I would even say if you're going to be okay with Kleiman leaving and with still years on his contract, whatever, and taking the Kansas State gig.
Were you okay with TJ Hall when he visited? I think he visited NDSU or certainly looked at it, coming from Colgate. If you're okay with him coming from Colgate to here last year as a grad transfer, I think you got to be okay with Jabril finding a better place to play.
So that's the interesting part of this. Now, let's go back to what you were just talking about the Bison coaches being caught off guard or maybe blindsided on this. And I think the longer that maybe we don't hear from NDSU, I think more on that is accurate.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
I think they've closed ranks just because I think to that point, I think they were caught off guard on this. When this news broke on Monday and we're speculating because we haven't talked to anybody yet, that it must have caught them off guard. It must have. That they had this. It was
so
totally out of left field.
Rivals.com, which has access to the portal somehow, they keep track of that stuff. Posted about 11 a.m. on Monday
morning. Yep.
And that's probably maybe the first that Matt Entz heard about it.
So we're speculating on this. I don't know if Jabril will give him a heads up to say this is going to happen. I don't.
God, you'd
I don't
hope
know.
so.
You would hope so is right. You would hope so is right. But it certainly seems to what I have heard and you have heard as well that it may have caught.
Entz once told me
staff.
though. He once told me over the Christmas break during the playoffs that there are times when coaches are the last to know when players go into the portal. He told me that.
Wow. Well, there you go, and that's probably adds more.
It could happen.
More reason to what we were just talking about on that front. So that is really interesting to see it, to say the least, on that. So now we've covered that part. So now the next layer of this, Kolpack, is really interesting to me. When did NDSU find out? That's what I'd like to know. B, obviously, where is Jabril going to go? And C, what does NDSU do now at that spot? Because linebacker, we had talked about this right after the season wrapped up when we were in Texas, that the Bison had all three of those guys back. Aaron Mercadal was back, Jackson Hankey was back, and obviously Jabril Cox was back. And now you've got a massive hole. The best defensive player in the country is gone, and now NDSU has to find a way to somehow fix that.
It's going to hurt against Oregon, certainly, because
Absolutely.
you need somebody with athletic skills to match up to Oregon's offensive skills. During the season, I think you can make up for it. There's enough depth. They've always had depth. Depth has not been an issue with this program over the last 8-9 years. It's the reason, number one, other than quarterback, I think they've been able to do this, that you have players just you've had some good players go out with ACLs.
Yep.
You've lost some stars, and you've been able to make up for it.
But not the level of this guy. You know, when Nick DeLuca got hurt in 2016,
he was pretty good at that level before he got hurt.
Sensational. And I think it was evident in that semifinal game against James Madison when he was not on the field that NDSU was lacking in the athleticism part. It's ironic now with the 4-game rule that if that was enacted, Jabril Cox would have played in that game against JMU.
So maybe you have to reinvent yourself a little bit on defense. You have Hankey coming back in the middle. You have Mercadal come back on the outside.
After that, you got a lot of youth, though, Kolpack, at that spot. A lot of unproven guys.
You got one of the Honey Badgers coming back.
Okay, well, that leads to our other question. Do you move them now full-time? Is James Kaiser now a linebacker in your mind?
He's never been a safety in my mind.
Ensis totally disagree with you on that, by the way. Now, I look at the other younger guys, and I look right to his younger brother, and Jabril Cox, who battled an injury for most of 2019, got healthy near the end of the season, and I know they're counting on him to have a big 2020 to stay on the field. He plays a true freshman on special teams for him finally to break through and play in 2020. Obviously, he doesn't have the size. His brother is 6'3", 233. Jabril is 6 foot 205 heading into spring ball right now. So,
yeah, so there'll be some interesting battles, and we knew there would. I mean, Jabril wasn't going to play this year. I mean, in spring ball.
No.
He wasn't going to see.
No, he wasn't going to see the field. No, so. Neither was Trey Lance, for that matter, either, after what your story you're reporting on earlier this month, or last month, excuse me, about the knee scope there. So you're right on here. We weren't going to see Jabril at all during the spring, and we're not going to see Trey Lance either because of...
It's the formula that they've done now the last 2-3 years that Kleiman started that, why put more damage to your body, more miles on the tire, and now they're doing it with their... the newfangled, what are the GPS things they're wearing. Now, so this is all measured. They weren't going to play.
You've hammered me on this because I've asked you about this every year for about 7 years in a row, about depth at this spot. And now it might come, like it was in 2016, come back to roost.
But they
now.
actually played more linebackers this year than they have in most years.
They have, but now who's going to be the guy? Who's going to step up now and start in this spot? Jackson Brown is gone, right? Brown... And he got replaced a little bit last year as well. Wirtz was the number one recruit, Kolpack. He played as a true freshman last year. That will he get the first crack at things in spring ball?
Well, he should be, but what about a guy like Dylan Hendricks?
Boy, they like him a lot.
He redshirted.
Yep.
He's got the size. He's 6'3".
225.
Is there anybody?
Big dude.
Recruiting class. Is there anybody?
They like the Wisniewski kid out of Sparta, Wisconsin.
He's 6'3".
And Nick Gazer told me on my show he reminded him a lot of Jabril Cox, which I always kind of, worry about somebody getting compared to number 42 here. But those are a couple guys in that spot you could certainly see there. The biggest thing, and I think, you were talking about this, and I've had other Bison fans tweet at me about what's next man up. It's next man up. It's not when you're replacing this guy.
Not with this guy.
No way. He was the freshman of the year, newcomer of the year in 2017. He was the defensive player of the year in 2018. Now, his stats may not reflect it, Kolpack, this past year, but he was effective in shutting down the one side of the field completely.
So going into next year, I was always wondering, Kay, what's the story of the position to watch? Because they had guys really coming back from
almost everywhere.
You lose some players, but you have people in the coming up.
Yep.
Certainly linebacker now
Absolutely.
is by far
Absolutely right.
By far the position to watch. And you got 2 or 3 starters returning.
Right. You still have Mercadale and Hankey back in that spot right now. I think the 2 names we mentioned, I think Wirtz and Hendricks are definitely worth mentioning for guys that could possibly get into the mix there. I look at Nick Kubitz played quite a bit on special teams last year.
Do we know anything about Juan A. Tillman?
He's not played a lot. He's not played. He did not play a lot this past year.
Cardis hasn't really.
Cardis is still banged up from the knee injury. Stump played as a true freshman, but didn't get on the field a whole lot in 2019.
He's 6'2", 221.
And I know they liked him. Bo Pauly has played quite a bit as well at 6'2", 221 as well, and he's going to be a senior. I would imagine, and I know Matt Entz likes him, that might be the guy who might get an initial look in spring ball. I'm not sure if he's the guy starting September 5th.
Or is there a grad transfer out there in Division II?
That was my next question. Okay, so if this happens,
transfer out
right?
there.
If NDSU gets a guy taken from them, why don't they go find somebody that can maybe come in and play right away? And there's nothing to say that can't happen between now and August on that front. Be really interested to see on that.
I'm sure they're scanning the transfer portal. Who won?
Now, my last point on this, and you and I have been doing radio, TV for a long time, and we've talked about this very subject happening in other schools. Eastern Washington, it hit them square in the face. You remember how upset Bo Baldwin was when Vernon Adams decided to do this? And he was the first real test case in the whole thing. And Adams barely graduated Eastern Washington to get into Oregon, and he had an okay year at Oregon. It wasn't obviously what he had the success at Eastern, but he was the first one. And now we've seen it at other spots, and I think actually it's kind of late that it's come here to Fargo, Kolpack.
Okay, I've been looking for an example for this for the last several hours today, and I've yet really to find one. Name one grad transfer who's gone from FCS to FBS where it's worked out like they hoped. Is there one out there?
I'm sure there probably is. Not off the top of my mind I can think
Gubru,
of here.
Gubru
Gage, it didn't work out for him either.
Montana Prukrup?
Dakota Prukrup?
Dakota?
No.
Yeah, Montana.
Close enough. He played at Montana State.
Yeah, right,
It didn't work. It didn't work for him, leaving Montana State to go to Oregon. Nope, didn't work there. I got to imagine there's probably a couple that I can.
There's a kicker going from Furman to North Carolina State next year. That could work out for him.
Maybe. But to this high profile, not to this extent. No. The only one I can think of, and this is FBS to FBS, was Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson left North Carolina State and went to Wisconsin and obviously had unbelievable success with the Badgers.
But that's a lateral move.
Well, one could argue you're moving up, going from NC State to Wisconsin.
It's a mini up.
You know,
yes.
But that's the only one I can think of. Right, you're right. But that's the only one I can think of on your question on that. So this is untested, but I'm curious. You know what? There's one other school I want to throw in there, Oklahoma, because of a guy that he knows, Jamar Cain. Now, Cain left before Jabril's freshman year when he went out west, but I have to imagine he had to know about him on the recruiting side of things. You know what I mean? Before he left to take that job, that might be another school on that front. Are you surprised it took this long to hit NDSU on this specific subject? Because there's been other really good players.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I haven't really thought about it. You know, I don't wake up going, okay, I wonder who's going to go to the transfer portal today. But
might have to start now.
I guess when you look at it objectively and you take a look at it over the last 2-3 years when the portals really got going, you figure it as a matter of time, especially when you have kids who probably are getting contacted more than we think.
Oh, my gosh, yes. And this is all about the next step, Kolpack, is about the NFL. And we always thought that Jabril was an NFL player. And the argument, and I'll ask you about this, they found Carson Wentz. And when I say they, I mean the NFL. He ended up being drafted 2nd overall, right, out of North Dakota State. And he didn't play a full senior season. Obviously went to the Senior Bowl and
will they
rocked
find you anyway? Is that the question?
That's my question. Would they have found him anyway had he stayed at NDSU?
Probably, but is it a difference between a 3rd and a 5th round pick? Now,
I
heard on your show this morning, I do listen once in a while.
Thank you.
When I'm really bored, nothing to do. But you were talking about Emmanuel. Emmanuel was different, though, because he was a different position player. He was not big enough to be a DN,
Right.
and he never played linebacker. So I think that's apples to oranges. Jabril's a pure linebacker. Okay?
Okay.
So I don't think you could compare those two. Because Emmanuel State, he was the the
Buck Buchanan winner.
Yeah.
He ended up being a 5th-round guy.
But he was still a tweener.
Correct.
Jabril's not
He's
a tweener.
He's a pure linebacker at the size he is. You're absolutely right. But I'm saying, if Jabril had a monster season, right, helps NDSU win a championship, goes and kills it at the combine like Tuska did, and could he have not gotten higher than the 4th round? And that's obviously what somebody's telling him. What say you could have an unbelievable. You know what? That has to be it, Kolpack. That you can't get higher than a 3rd or 4th round, because what you've always told me, the stigma of North Dakota State or FCS next to your name.
Where did Colin Saunders go this year?
He was a 3rd-round guy.
That's not bad.
That's pretty good. I'm not sure if it's signing bonus guaranteed money, but he ended up winning a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs.
He went from Western Illinois, for
Yes.
God's sakes, to a 3rd-round draft pick.
Yep. But the lure of playing in Baton Rouge, Tuscaloosa, Norman, it's got to be there.
Absolutely.
And more power to him.
Yeah.
On that front.
It's cold up here in November, December, and you're down in the bayou, or you're down playing for
in the swamp if you're playing in Florida,
Bama,
Georgia. Yeah, absolutely. That's where every college football player dreams of playing. When they see those games on TV on prime time, when there's 100,000 people in Death Valley, when it's LSU and Alabama playing every Saturday night in November. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? You know what I mean? I don't blame him on that front. Not one iota on that. But leads me to my last point here on this pod before we wrap up. Is NDSU going to be in the same boat in 2 years' time with their quarterback?
Possibly.
Although I believe they will be.
I think a difference potentially here is the parents. I think Trey's parents have seen the Carson thing. They've seen how he was treated through the draft process. And I think the Lances have a pretty good grasp on their son. And in the in the West Coast offense, you're in a pro-style offense, you're in the huddle, and it's pretty hard to beat a situation like this and then go to the combine, go to the all-star games, and you could be a pretty good draft pick.
Maybe we just listen.
I think it's a difference at home.
I would also list off the guys we just talked about, a quarterback that tried to do that, and it hasn't worked. Outside of Russell Wilson, again, that was FBS to FBS. The other guys who made it FCS to FBS, it has not worked out.
Last 2 quarterbacks have been drafted. The last 2 great linebackers.
I think a lot has to be said about that quarterback coach on the north side of Fargo as well.
Randy
that's
Hedberg.
Helped out on that. My only thing on this, and this is total speculation, maybe it's not the grad transfer route. Maybe he's just done after his junior year and decides to go to the NFL draft. That's a whole other subject we haven't ever had to cover either, Kolpack.
You just don't see that very often, though.
He's had a couple guys in the FCS do it this year. The guy from Pete Guerrero from Monmouth decided to forgo his senior year and go straight to the NFL draft. So, I mean, you don't, but that could be a possibility as well.
Maybe got sick of Monmouth.
New Jersey's lovely every part of the year, but it's really going to be interesting going forward, and we'll see what happens.
And the one-time transfer rules coming up with the NCAA, that could just totally wipe everything out.
And that could be, and this is something that I know you and I disagree on, where this could become, and I'll use your words, the Wild West, or free agency for the most part.
So you're admitting it?
I'm not saying I never disagree with you on that part, but I'm telling you that it's about time the players have some sort of rights, that the players have some sort of dictate on where they could go. If the coaches can do that, why can't the players on that front? You know what I mean? But obviously the downside, and I never didn't acknowledge this, love the double negative, is that this could happen. That the FCS could be the minor leagues for the FBS.
Totally. Absolutely.
You know, wait a minute. If we need a linebacker, why don't we go get that guy playing on the best team in the country in the FCS? Or if we need a wide receiver, wow, number 1 for the green team is pretty good. You know what I mean?
That's April 1st. Is that when that vote's up?
That's when the vote comes through.
And
it's going to pass.
Bison coaches on April 1st. That night, if it passes, you're going to find them belly on a floor at Chubb's Pub or something. Poor boys.
But that's so that's the latest here on Jabril Cox. He has put his name into the transfer portal, and we should emphasize that he could come back. I would think it's a less than a 2% chance, at least in my mind, that he comes back to Fargo. Right, Kolpack?
Yeah,
little to none chance he's coming back. Correct.
So when he put on his little statement there, made me a great player and a great person.
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever acknowledge you were a great person and a great player publicly? Isn't there a certain humbleness lacking there?
I don't know. I mean, in this day and age, if you want to, he is a great player. If he's acknowledging that, everyone said that. He's speaking the truth.
I could never say, thank you, Fargo Moorhead. You made me a great writer. I could never do that. Because I'm probably, I'm average, whatever.
Hey,
but
you've been Sports Writer of the Year. Come on now. Come on now.
But you see where I'm going with that?
I do. But, I mean, this is the
There's
age
something
of...
about that.
I get you.
Did he have to put that in there?
But this is in this era and there are kids still, for the most part, 18, 19, 20,
that made me what I
old.
am. That made me, you judge what I am.
Yeah.
That made me what I am.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
And he decided to go that route. So we'll see what happens. But as we tape this now, no destination yet. My money's on LSU. You want to go in it? You want to take a different school? Or are you going with that
no
one?
way.
You're going with
No
LSU
way.
on that
Yes.
too? So we'll see what happens. That is the emergency edition of the Kolpack and Izzo Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next time.